Good evening to everyone and welcome to the Master of Educational Technology at UBC's, our speaker series here. This is, I think, number 5 that we've hosted in our time since we started, and it's called the Anti-Racism in Ed Technosphere. My name is Dr. Carrie Ewart. I'm a lecturer for the Master of Educational Technology program at UBC and one of the designers and coordinators for the Anti-Racism in the Ed Technosphere speaker series, along with Dr. Samia Khan, our director of the MET program and colleague. And we are very pleased to be running this series today for you in this particular presentation. So I will now pass it on to Dr. Khan, who will do our land acknowledgement, please.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I'm Dr. Samia Khan, Director of the MET Program, Associate Professor and Co-Coordinator with Dr. Carrie Ewart of the seminar series. I would like to gratefully acknowledge that today I'm speaking on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. My house, Master of Educational Technology offices, servers, and our institution is located on this territory. This week marks 1 year since the uncovering of the graves in Kamloops' former residential school sites. The role of educational institutions and technologies and the harm of children, adults, neighbors, and friends in our Indigenous communities caused me to reflect on the changes that we need today. We at MET are committed to joining with our university community to fostering needed justice and reconciliation. Towards this, MET has developed a vision statement about our program, and we have launched this series on anti-racism that calls for dialogue and action.
Now, the purpose of this speaker series is to acknowledge the commitment that every individual has to inclusivity, to addressing systemic racism, and with a focus on anti-Indigenous and anti-Black and anti-people of color racism. This series seeks to identify the responsibility that educators and leaders have to facilitating and supporting anti-racist approaches and strategies for truth, redress, reconciliation, and really change within their practice to enhance and transform learning environments, both in person and virtual and learning cultural settings, with a specific directive being digital technologies. Presenters will discuss racism and tools to support future-ready skills and mindsets in the changing dynamic of the digital age.
The Master of Ed Tech program is a graduate program in the Faculty of Education at UBC that educates professionals on the use and impact of digital learning technologies.
All right. So right before we introduce our amazing speaker, I just want to speak very briefly about the call to action. Now, as a result, at MET, we are committed to the follow-up to each presentation of this speaker series with a call to action challenge. And we invite attendees to make one change this month and to share it with us as a next step through allyship and building and really moving towards that action plan as opposed to just talking about it. So there will be more at the end of this presentation in terms of details, but I also want to indicate that there is a Slido link for asking questions throughout the presentation that we can share with Dr. Rutherford at the end of the presentation. And at this time, I'd like to pass it over to Dr. Khan to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ewart. It's my great honor to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Camille Rutherford. Dr. Rutherford is the Vice Provost, Strategic Partnerships and International at Brock University in Ontario, Canada. She is an expert at establishing partnerships and developing new and alternative pathways for students in higher education. She oversees the work of Brock International in her current role. Dr. Rutherford is also an Associate Professor of Education. She works with teachers, adult educators, educational leaders, and technology companies to explore the use of technology to transform leadership and enhance teaching and learning. Dr. Rutherford has supported school districts in developing a system-wide approach to fostering 21st century teaching and learning. Her research includes well-cited articles on using online social media to support pre-service student engagement, teacher leadership and organizational structure, and engaging everyday mobile assistive technologies for adults with intellectual and or developmental disabilities. In the pursuit of educational innovation, Dr. Rutherford has mentored and served on the advisory board of several early stage ed tech startups where her experience working with multinational tech companies such as Microsoft, IBM, Pearson, and Smart Technologies was utilized to support the transition from an innovative idea to the development of successful products and services. Welcome, Dr. Rutherford.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Most importantly, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this important mission that your organization has and this series that you have launched. Today, I'll be looking at systemic racism and future-ready technologies. And I think it's important for us as all educators that we have a future-oriented perspective, that we're looking not to just help our students be future-ready, but we're helping ourselves to be future ready as well. And as part of that, we want to ensure that the educational technology resources that we're using do not contribute to techno-racism. So what is techno-racism? Pretty simply, it's racism that's encoded into technological resources or technical systems, especially the systems that we use on a daily basis. Again, I think it's important to note then that very often when these resources are being developed, that wasn't their intention. That was not their purpose to create a technology that discriminated. But it's important to know then that technology is not neutral. It very often can replicate some of the racial, ethnic, gender, and other inequalities that are prevalent in our society. And most importantly is that it can make those much worse as well. So techno-racism is racism that's been embedded in these technical resources and processes that are out there. So as we get into that, these are the key technologies that we're going to be chatting about today. And again, these are resources that I think then some are very cutting edge, some have been around for a while, but I think most importantly, they're the ones that can have significant implications for us as educators and within the education system. So we're going to be looking at VR, AR, and 360 video. We'll talk a little bit about blockchain. We'll look at predictive analytics, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and bots, and how they are being used in the education sphere. It's really important to think about then, for us that work in education, information is power, but it's only power when you know what to do with it, and that you understand the implications that it can have on your practice. So that's my key goal for you to understand today. Throughout the presentation, you'll see this slide. And again, I really want you to think about, as you're hearing about these technological resources, thinking about the strengths and weaknesses, the benefits and challenges. Importantly, I want you to think about, is this tool accessible and inclusive? Who created the tool? Was the development process inclusive? Does this tool reinforce or dismantle bias and prejudice? How much bandwidth is required? And that bandwidth sounds so simple, but is a key contributor to the digital divide, that very often resources that are being made can only be used with high processing power or high bandwidth, which right away eliminates the use for a lot of marginalized communities. But I also want you to think about who profits from the use of this tool. Was it created with students in mind, or was it created with profits in mind? The most important thing is, what are the implications of this technology for your work? So as we go through this presentation, you'll see this screen repeatedly. And during that time, I'd like to just take even just a few seconds just to jot down what are the implications for your own work. And it may seem a little redundant, but it's really important for you to take some time to think about it right then. It's also throughout the presentation, and the organizers will be sharing with you a copy of this presentation that has lots of links so that you can go deeper into those presentations and think more deeply about the implications of that technology for your own work. So here we go. So the first thing is sort of grouping together virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and 360 video. We're going to start off with virtual reality. So I hope you can see this picture well, because I love this picture, probably not for the reasons that you think. So this picture was taken at one of the first developers conference for the Oculus, which is the VR headset. I think it's great, so you can see that it's a pretty sizable, not just ski goggles, but that sit on your face, physically connected to a computer. And again, you can see the computer that you can see there is an Apple MacBook, and the original Oculus required quite a bit of processing power. It wouldn't work on a Chromebook or even a cheaper type of laptop. So you had to be physically tethered to a device, a very powerful device. So I think that this picture captures that very well. Most importantly, I want you to look at the audience. So this audience is technology developers. These are the people that will be developing the programs and software that are utilized for the Oculus headset. I hope you noticed the lack of diversity in that crowd. So again, that's why I love this picture. But what I think is really interesting in this is that here's a major conference, hundreds of developers with the headset on. And right now they are oblivious to the fact then that Mark Zuckerberg is walking right past them. I think it highlights how isolating it can be. So here we have Mark Zuckerberg walking in. They don't even realize that he's there. Hundreds of developers, mostly male developers, mostly white developers, are then building the software related to that. That's why I love this picture. So it's also important to note, and this was from an article from the Rochester Institute of Technology, that highlights that the less diversity that we have in any workplace, the greater likelihood that you're going to have major design flaws when you don't have a diverse perspective of the people that are working there. And so those design flaws very often affect people of color. So that's why I love this picture, because in one snapshot, you can see so much of the problems when it comes to technology development, and especially this specific technology. So again, we see all these developers in the Oculus headset. This is probably a little bit more of what you expect to see VR in an educational setting. So here we have some students. This is not the Oculus headset. This is using a headset, but inside it is just a mobile phone. Generally Android phones, which can be cheaper and more accessible. And then what students can do is then they can load a VR field trip that Google very often shares. And then you put that in the headset, and then you can move your head around to be able to see that. And I think it is a great way to create an immersive experience, to go to a place that your students couldn't normally go on their own. And I think then this type of VR has been referred in previous MET sessions. And so it was highlighted there that you could use these VR expeditions to learn about Asian Pacific American cultures. So it's a great way to use a technology in a positive way to learn more about other cultures. Another great use of VR, and this was done at Stanford, that they originally called it their empathy lab. And so it was a VR experience that you use with, again, the Oculus headset, that you experienced a day of a homeless person. So it's not just they created these videos, they followed up with research to highlight, they did pre and post tests and found then that when students went and had this VR experience, that they had an opportunity to virtually be in the footsteps of a homeless person, that they were more empathetic with the plight of those homeless people. And not just then, oh, I watched the video, I'm more empathetic, that they've also been doing longitudinal studies that now they have seen the lasting impact on empathy of these types of studies. And it's been really having a positive impact thus far. So not just with homeless people. This is another video that you put on the headset and you get to experience the life of someone else. And what we see right here is that the gentleman that has the headset on, he's going out and having this experience, and he's wondering, like, why are these people being aggressive to me? Why are they treating me like this? And so when you look at that picture there, he finally looks down and realizes he's in the body of a Black man. And so it gave him an opportunity to be more empathetic about the plight of someone of a different color. They've also done some studies when it comes to bystanders, and they have found then that it has a very positive effect in encouraging bystanders, not just to witness something, but to intercede and stop any inappropriate behavior or action that's been happening. So again, I would encourage you to take a look at some of the work, the VR work from Stanford that they've done in their virtual human interaction lab, in helping to mitigate racism by developing empathy and helping people to understand what life is like for someone else. So that's the virtual reality. Now we'll go into augmented reality. So the augmented reality here is an example of the Microsoft HoloLens. So the headset is not quite as cumbersome as the Oculus, but it gives you an opportunity to not just to see digital images, but it also has a see-through lens that you can see in the space and room that you're currently in at the same time. And it also gives you an opportunity to move around a digital image. So it's bringing these digital images into your real space that you are in right there. And again, so just looking at that, you can imagine the types of implications for medical education, being able not just to see the human form, but to see the different layers, to see the the skeleton, the circulation system as well. So the HoloLens is one of the good things about it is that because you're untethered, it keeps your hands free. And so anything related to workplace training where you want to be able to still use your hands, but be able to access digital information at the same time. And so the example that we have here is we have a mechanic that they're working on something, but at the same time, they can be looking at the repair instructions, the schematics of what they're being able to do. They don't have to carry around all of this information. They can have the digital information with them as well. So they think that there'll be some good, interesting implications for this mixed reality or AR in the workplace. And here's another example, again, because your hands are free to being able to do something, that you can also have a video stream and have someone that is maybe coaching you or explaining to you what needs to be done. So I think that you can really imagine some really profound uses and implications. So one of the implications of this technology is that one of the earliest adopters of this AR technology, and especially the Microsoft HoloLens, the first purchaser, and just as the beta versions were coming out, they ordered $20 million of these HoloLenses. And you may not be surprised that the first big purchaser was the military. And so we definitely need to think about the implications of that. When you see that type of early investment, you can see that there's a good chance that their needs are going to drive development of that technology. And that can have very severe and significant implications for people of color or our people. So we definitely need to be cognizant of how these technologies can be used, misused, and the implications for that as well. So if we move on to mixed reality, and mixed reality means then that you are not encumbered by a specific headset or technology. We see all the other ones, their uses are generally one-to-one. And so with this type of reality, especially very often, you may need specific projectors to be able to do that. And here's another example that has a specific screen that creates a holographic image. And so now you're not necessarily tethered. More than one people can utilize it and benefit from that. And again, it's trying to bring digital images and digital resources into your surroundings at the same time. So again, being able to bring someone in. So instead of having me right now as a two-dimensional image on your screen, imagine being able to have a more 3D hologram image of me in your space, working and speaking with you right now. So again, we think it can have some really interesting implications. One of the things then with VR, AR, and mixed reality is that they're generally quite expensive and burdensome and difficult to use. But when it comes to 360 video, the next thing we're going to look at, probably for the majority of people that are here today, there's a good chance that your mobile device that you have can record 360 video, or at the very least, it can play a 360 video. So it's much more accessible. And then it also means that it's easier for educators, frontline educators, to be able to use as well. Here's a great example. It was one of the sort of earliest widely watched videos as well. So the New York Times did a great story with very detailed reporting about the plight of refugees, and it was called The Displaced. And to accompany the article, and you can click and look at that article as well once you get the slides, but it also had a 360 video with it. And that 360 video was taking a tour through a refugee camp. And again, it's very much of it's through the eyes of children and young people. And I remember watching this video with some 8 and 10-year-olds. and them watching the video and asking questions about where then are their bathrooms, where do they go to school, what happens when it's cold, and very quickly in watching that video. And again, with the beauty of 360 video is that when you move your head or move your device, it moves the camera as well. So it feels like you have control of that medium, and again, can evoke great sense of empathy. So this was a great video to be able to do that. And now you can search through YouTube and search just through 360 videos. And so we also see some great implications for learning. And here's a 360 video of an operating room. So if you're working with students in health sciences, here's an opportunity to prepare them for what the operating room is going to look like. The link that is there is to a heart valve operation. And you can, again, move yourself and have different perspective of what's happening within that space. And again, very accessible, very easy to record those videos, to share those. So when we look at the overall benefits and challenges of VR, AR, and 360 video, especially within the classroom, so the number one benefit is that it's very immersive. That immersion can create empathy, help you to really engage with what's taking place, because very often you have control of the video feed by moving your head, that it creates a more active learning, and that can create a high level of engagement with the students. And most importantly, it can be used very positively to simulate real life. Those are the benefits. The challenges are then, again, when you see this student with the headset on, it can be very isolating. And I want you to think back to that picture of Mark Zuckerberg walking amongst hundreds of people and them not realizing that he's there. So it can be very, very isolating if your students were to be using that. Right now, the equipment is quite costly. The price point is coming down. We know then for some of the 360 videos, some of the AR, that so Google has created a cardboard sort of ViewMaster like that makes it easier to put your phone in, that can be very easy to be able to afford. But one of the biggest concerns is then definitely with VR, to a certain degree, lesser degree AR, but even with 360 video, that there's research that says between 20 and 40% of the people, it can create significant motion sickness. I am one of those people. I have difficulty, as excited as I may be, I have great difficulty keeping any of these headsets on for more than a few minutes, or I start feeling nauseous. And so it's really important when you think 20 to 40% of people can experience motion sickness by utilizing this technology. How accessible is it really then? And because of that, a lot of this content is generally only 10, 20 minutes long. So this takes me back to this slide. What are the implications for your work? I want you to just take a few seconds to think about how you would utilize these within your own practice. What are some of the concerns that you may have? What are some of the strengths and weaknesses and challenges? And again, I would encourage you to go back and think about these a little bit deeply as we go through, as you review the slides after this presentation. So the next thing we're going to look at is blockchain. And again, we're looking at blockchain. I'm not going to be looking at Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, looking at the implications of blockchain for education. And again, there's a link to a video about blockchain. I think there's a lot more people that have a foundational understanding of blockchain works. So the easy way to think about it is you go into a bank or an accounting, they have a ledger, which is a record of all the accounts that have taken place, all the transactions that have taken place. And so what the blockchain does is that it makes an open or a joint collaborative ledger. So not just one person has a copy of those transactions, that multiple people have a copy of those transactions. And then that means that multiple people can validate or authenticate that this transaction or that action took place. And each time there's a new action, it's like an additional link being onto the chain. So you want to think about it. Here is a ledger like a chain that multiple people are keeping copies of, so that there isn't a single point of failure, and that multiple people are constantly authenticating or validating that what took place. So what are the implications for education? So instead of in accounting, you have a ledger, you think about blockchain and you think about a creditor. So that may be the licensing body. So if you are a teacher, the people who hold or accredit your certification, your employer, so that may be the university or the college or the school district. Other stakeholders are students and teachers. And so now, instead of just the institution having a copy of your transcript, that each of these bodies can play a role in validating and authenticating what has taken place. So it could be in a situation that with a presentation like this, and I have seen experiments that people have done, I could create a blockchain record of this presentation as well everyone who participated. So now here's a joint ledger or record of this session, what you learned, and everything that people who participated in it. So then across one's entire educational journey, you can have a record of these educational milestones that is held in a single wallet, but then is validated. So instead of, and we all know the challenge of going back to a previous institution to get a copy of your transcript, right now they're the only person, the only institution that has a copy of it. But with blockchain, multiple people can validate that. So I don't have to go back to UBC to say I participated in this. You can go to the other participants, you can go to the presenter and validate the fact that you participated in this. So it gives us an opportunity to record these educational milestones all across someone's life cycle or across their educational journey, and they're constantly adding to the blockchain. The same way right now that you may have, I said I wasn't going to talk about cryptocurrency, but that the way that you may have a cryptocurrency wallet, and that you can have different cryptocurrencies added to it, or other people help to validate it, that you would have this educational credential wallet that captures all of your experiences, a little bit like a digital portfolio, but it has this added value of here are people then are validating or authenticating that you participated and took place in these educational milestones. Again, it's very early stage. MIT is creating blockchain credentials for their students. And we also see then in Ethiopia is working with Cardano, which is a blockchain platform, that they are working to create a blockchain-based digital identity and digital record for all of their students. They hope then this will help it to make those educational records more accessible, but as well then will help to mitigate forward and transcript tampering as well. So then this blockchain that Cardano is creating can verify students' grades, their attendance, their performance, and they're hoping that that will help to boost and authenticate their nationwide education. So those are some of the benefits. One of the greatest concerns that in anything dealing with the blockchain is the environmental impact. So we know then that blockchain, or not all blockchain technologies are created the same. Bitcoin is very energy intensive. More of the more recently created blockchain platforms are based on proof of stake as opposed to proof of work. So they're more energy efficient. So that is something to mitigate that. But we want to be cognizant of the environmental impact of this. More importantly is this link here that highlighted a 2018 study that said only 14% of staff in blockchain startups were women. I tried to get some data on people of color, could not find any, but again, we can assume that there's probably going to be a replication of the lack of diversity of the general technology industry in things related to blockchain. So that's going to be a great concern as well of how well these technologies will be used. Will they replicate inequities? Will they be tools of techno-racism, or will they be inclusive? And again, would like you to take just a few seconds to think about what are the implications of blockchain and blockchain technologies for your work. Next topic we're going to look at is the Internet of Things. And so with the Internet of Things, it's really just looking at web-enabled devices. 20 years ago, you probably only had one device that connected to the internet, and that was probably your computer, maybe your phone. But now within your house, there's probably multiple devices that are web-enabled that can connect to the internet, connect to other devices, and share information and data going back and forth. There's a good chance that you have something like this, whether that's a Google Nest or an Amazon Show. These are devices that are being used as hubs for all your web-enabled devices at home. So your phones, your tablets, your thermostat, your lights, your refrigerator, your coffee maker, all of these things. And so those are how the Internet of Things has come into our house. And then we start looking at how the Internet of Things is coming into our schools. One of the areas that has been utilized as well is using web-enabled school buses, so that as soon as a student gets on the bus, their attendance is taken, you know who is going to be present, you know what time the bus is going to get to school. It can also then be connected to the thermostats at school. And then when they know the students are approaching the school, especially in colder climates, it can turn on the heat or turn on the air conditioning and be more energy efficient instead of heating or cooling the schools for hours before students get there. On the general university campus, we know then that our people that run our campus ITs now know then that when they count the number of students at their institutions, they have to assume that each student is bringing 4 to 6 web-enabled devices with them when they come on campus. And that can be even more if students are living on campus. So it's important to think about all these devices that are on campus, all these devices that are connected to the campus internet, and how that contributes to the Internet of Things and how that data is being used. One of the ways that that Internet of Things data is being used was during the pandemic and for COVID surveillance. And so then that at many institutions that had vaccine mandates, they wanted to make sure that only the people that were on campus all the people that were on campus had submitted their vaccine testimony that they had been vaccinated. And what some institutions were doing is then if a student hadn't submitted that information, if they tried to connect to the university Wi-Fi, the only thing they could access was the reminder to complete their COVID vaccination. The other thing is then you can track as soon as their foot hits campus, or more importantly, soon as their mobile device hits the campus Wi-Fi, they know who you are and where you are, and they could tell if you were vaccinated or not, and then they could track you and ask you to leave the institution. So it's important to think about how these Internet of Things were used for COVID, but they are or can be used to surveil students. As well, when we look at the Internet of Things, we very often see these types of cameras across campus. They can quickly and easily be used to connect with facial recognition software, which a number of organizations, so here we see the ACLU, and with an article about facial recognition and is it racist or not. Harvard has also done some research related to racial discrimination in face recognition. Just want to highlight here this TED Talk about this, I'm just trying to, she's at UCL, she's a professor at UCLA, fighting bias in algorithms. And some of the work that she has done has already identified then that facial recognition works best for the people who created it, which is very often white men. Facial recognition works best with white men. It can be very error prone and create errors for people with darker skin. And the people that have the greatest number of errors are women like myself, dark-skinned women. And you may think, oh, so it won't be able to recognize me. But when facial recognition is being used to grant access or deny access to spaces, if it cannot properly identify you, then you can be denied access. And that is of grave concern. Just of grave concern, this is, I think, connects to, again, one of the earlier sessions about in this series, that facial recognition does not work very well or misclassifies transgender and non-binary people. So it's not just that it misidentifies them, but again, it can deny access or prevent them from being able to go to specific locations. Of greater concern is how this facial recognition is being used on campus for the proctoring of online exams. So as early as 2015, there were articles about concerns about the intrusion of privacy and violating students' privacy of software. And more recently, we see then that this software, when it's connected to this facial recognition, can perpetuate inequities because the algorithms that are being used for that. So we also know then, definitely during the pandemic, when so many institutions went online, and then they used proctoring software for online software, that for students of color, it had difficulty identifying them, or maybe I'm writing my exam, and because it's having difficulty tracking me, it's then going to trigger me as a cheater, kicking me out of the exam, and then tell my professor that I am cheating. So those are significant concerns. We have seen that there's been significant pushback on the use of this software for a variety of reasons across institutions or campuses. But that again is why it's really important for us to think about the implications of the Internet of Things and this type of facial recognition software and how that software is being used. So again, consider the implications for your own work. Now we also see then when you combine the Internet of Things and predictive analytics. So predictive analytics is taking all of that data that may be gathered from the Internet of Things and using it to make future predictions. So it's taking historical data and is being used to make future predictions on different things that may happen. And so then here's an example of IBM utilizing that, and that they're using then the institutional historical data to make predictions when it comes to applications. What are the type of students that will be most successful at your institution? What are the students that are at risk of dropping out? How do we then create some interventions to help support them to get them back on track? It can be used to project your enrollment for your institution and your programs, help you for deciding what your class sizes and staffing should be, and then can also being used to help students identify academic programs that they can be most successful in as well. So one institution that has been really successful at using that is Georgia State University. And they've been using these predictive analytics, taking the historical data, doing deep dives into dropout points in their academic programs and how do they alleviate that, and using that to create proactive academic advising. So they take the predictive analytics, combine that with proactive academic advising through their Student Success Center, and they've been able to increase their graduation rate by 23 points. They are graduating over 2,000 more students a year than they were 5 years ago. It's also reduced the time for students to graduate by half a year, so it's saving them, those students, lots of money. And they've been able to use that data, and that again, their Student Success Center and the proactive academic advising to eliminate the achievement gaps that are based on race, ethnicity, or income. So those are some really positive benefits of using these predictive analytics. But again, predictive analytics are based on historical data, and you have to have good and accurate historical data. So garbage in, garbage out is a common phrase in technical programming. So if you have garbage data going in, you're going to have garbage data coming out. So that's something to be really concerned about, that you have accurate data that is going in and it's appropriate data. So the other thing then this article highlights then, that I mentioned how Georgia State has been using it very positively. Here's a key thing. The students at Georgia State did not know that the data was that predictive analytics was being used on them, that a predictive analytics was being used to encourage them to go to an academic advisor, to reach out to students, to be able to support them. And so these algorithms can unintentionally harm or target marginalized students, especially Black and Latino students in the US, and that they may be tagged as potential dropouts, or may be have more intrusion on their academic experience than other students. I think that this in the yellow highlights, there was a professor at University of Arizona that took all the data from the Internet of Things across campus. So the data from students when they were swiping into the gym, signing out books, entering classroom buildings, swiping into their dorm, even when they charged a coffee and things of that. And that professor used all of that data. It's definitely not clear to me that the students knew that this is how their data was being used. But that professor then was using that data and a machine learning algorithm to detect patterns of student engagement. And they thought it was a great success, because with all of that data, they could predict whether a student would drop out with 80 to 90% accuracy. which can be really useful and great. But again, it's what historical data is being used. It's also important to know that this industry of predictive analytics has grown to what they say is about a $500 million market and has created a number of for-profit companies, which I think is very interesting because basically they're taking our data, our student data, and selling it back to us in these predictive analytics. And again, it's really important to be wary of garbage in and garbage out. In the Netherlands, they were using some software, some algorithms, and these algorithms had, I think, originated in the US to predict welfare fraud. When they then ran an audit of that software, they found then that the audits targeted people of non-Western appearance. So the historical data they were using was biased. And so thus the predictions were biased. Luckily, this Dutch scandal then served as a warning and they prevented the use of these types of algorithms. But we always have to be cognizant and very wary of what historical data is being used and how it's being used, especially when we look at our Indigenous brothers and sisters. So if the data is connected to intergenerational trauma, so literally you're taking historical data that embeds trauma, and if that data is being used to predict future actions or occurrences, we have to be very, very cautious and cognizant of that. And there's a great likelihood that those predictions that are based on historical or intergenerational trauma will create future trauma with that. So again, I want you to really think about what are the implications of that technology, the Internet of Things and predictive analytics for your own work, who profits from it, does it reinforce or dismantle bias or prejudice? And again, I hope you'll take some more time to think about that as well. Lastly, we're going on to the area of artificial intelligence and bots. So very often when you see artificial intelligence, people think something like this. This is Sophia. She was the world's first robot citizen. I think the UAE gave her an actual passport. And so people think, oh, AI, it's these robots. I'll give you another look at her. Not the friendliest looking face. And so people very often think this is what AI looks like, and it's not. This is what AI and artificial intelligence looks like. This is IBM Watson, their supercomputer, and this is what artificial intelligence looks like. And so early on, IBM was using Watson to support AI for learning. And again, using historical data, databases of information to solve educational problems or to be able to answer questions. I want you to take a look at this picture. This is a professor from Georgia Tech and his teaching assistants. I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm not certain that if you can see clearly enough, but how many teaching assistants does this professor have? Most people will say, oh, quickly, 1, 2, 3, I count the professor and 8 teaching assistants. Well, you are incorrect because there are 9 teaching assistants because the computer using AI was a teaching assistant. So they've run this experiment a number of times that one of the teaching assistants that supported students online was Jill Watson. That was the name that they gave her because it was powered by the IBM Watson supercomputer. And they ran the experiment at the end of the year. They said, hey, just so you know, one of the teaching assistants was not a person, it was an AI. Can you identify that? And they've run this experiment multiple times now. The students could not identify the AI teaching assistant. I feel kind of bad for the teaching assistants because sometimes people would say some of the humans were AI. But that is a way that it's been used for anyone who's taught online. Very often students have lots of questions for information that is already accessible. And so an AI or a chatbot can be really useful to answer those questions, then thus freeing up the professor or those teaching assistants to deal with uniquely human questions when students have greater problems that cannot be answered by an AI or a bot. Going to go back to Georgia State. Georgia State was successful in using a chat bot to support students, incoming students in their first year. In the summer before they started their first year. And they were able to answer hundreds of thousands of inquiries or questions of students, which then freed up their human staff to answer the more complex questions. And generally what happens is then if it's during business hours, that if you answer the chat or even after business hours, you ask the chatbot a question. If it cannot answer it, if it's during business hours, it connects you to a phone line to have a human, then that will answer your question for you, or it can follow up with you on an email or something like that. I think chatbots are a great resource, especially to answer questions then that are readily available information from your syllabus. When is the final exam? How many marks are being awarded? What percent is this final assignment? I've had, you are definitely a techno geek when you create a chatbot for the fun of it. So I think it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I created a chatbot during the holiday break, just because it was fun. There's a link here to lots of different resources to create a chatbot. I think I created my first chatbot in an afternoon, then went on and created some chatbots for some academic programs that academic advisors could use. Because of the experience that I had read about at Georgia State, they found that the majority of the inquiries to the chatbot came in after 10 o'clock at night. The other thing that they've heard back from students, that students felt more comfortable asking what they thought was a dumb question to the chatbot because they knew that wouldn't be judged. And so a chatbot can help students to get the answers to their questions 24 hours a day at any time, help them get that information in an easily accessible way. So I think that it really has some great potential, and they're not that difficult to create a chatbot knowledge base to be able to do that. But again, here's the warning: garbage in, garbage out. You want to make sure that you have good data that's going in. They have good questions that are going in. And then you always still have that human that is available to answer anything that the chatbot couldn't. So I hope that you will consider that. And again, think about the implications of chatbots and AI for your work. And again, what are the strengths and weaknesses? Is it accessible and inclusive? That is a key thing with chatbots, that very often they are only text-based. So anyone that has any visual impairments may have some challenges related to that. Very often now you can create an audio one that will read out to that as well. So again, these ongoing questions, what are the implications for your work? I hope you take some time to think about that. So now as we're wrapping up, we come back to this big question. Can technology be racist? It definitely can, if we allow it to. Here's a great link from Rochester Institute of Technology. This character, the cartoon here, is an issue that I've had. Go to an airport bathroom, I go to wash my hands, I can't turn on the sink, I can't get the soap, I don't really understand what the problem was. And I was sharing this example with my brother, and he said that same thing had happened to him. He was in a public bathroom and he couldn't get the water to turn on. And an Asian man beside him says, "Oh, it won't work for you." And he's like, "What?" And he goes, "Oh, it doesn't work for Black people. Go get a paper towel, put it over your hand, and then it will work." And sure enough, it does work. So if you link to this article, it talks about that. There's even videos on YouTube that show these racist water dispensers or soap dispensers. The key thing from this article about is technology can be racist if we allow it to be. And that's why it behooves us as educators not to allow it to be, that we stay informed and help prepare our students and ourselves to push back on these resources, to participate in the development, and make sure that they are not allowed to be racist. Here's an article from Fast Company talking about some concerns about the metaverse, but the key thing here is highlighted in yellow, that if we want to prevent techno-racism, that we need to make sure that the next iteration of these resources, and again, a lot of people talking about the metaverse being the next iteration of the internet, that it's inclusive and that it works appropriately for everyone. And for that to happen, we need to make certain then that marginalized community, that peoples of color, play a lead in shaping it and developing that. it's also really important then that for all of us as allies, and this again connects back to one of the previous MET workshops in these series, that we challenge the way that we think. We constantly need to be challenged the way that we think. And Dr. James has listed a number of resources that are there to help you with that. But in challenging the way that we think, and I know it sounds redundant, but I cannot emphasize this enough, you need to continually be thinking about the implications of these technologies for your own work, how they were developed. Are they inclusive? Do they reinforce or dismantle bias or prejudice? That is key to ensure then that you can be a future-ready educator and that you can prepare your students and your learners for their future as well. So my last concluding question is, are you future ready? I hope this presentation has helped you to become future ready, that you can use this information for power and that it can better inform yourself, your students, your colleagues, your peers, and ensure then that techno-racism does not perpetuate. Thank you very much. We'll be happy to answer a few key questions that students may have. Again, from my view right now, I can't see the chat. So wondering then if Dr. Ewert, if you can help me out with some of the questions that students may have or participants may have.
Absolutely. First of all I have to say is, wow. That was absolutely incredible. Thank you to Dr. Rutherford for this incredible presentation. I'm actually going to take back over sharing responsibilities right now. And we are going to, in just a moment, start the questions. But right now, I just want to, because the work that you're doing and what you talked about is so important, we want to make sure that this conversation is moving forward and that we are cognizant and thinking, are we future ready? Are we ready to make these decisions? And are we aware of the decisions we're making in the choices through our technology? So as mentioned at the beginning, we do have a call to action of moving this talk to practice and moving it into that action forum. So we do have I'm just going to post it right now. Here's more information if you look in the chat area. That link right there will take you to the call of action. We've already had many presentations, lesson plans, unit plans, workshop, training series submitted by our attendees that attach to the content from previous sections. And this is the call to action. You start making those changes, start talking about this. We will also include our Twitter handle in here to get those conversations going, but please check out what you can do to engage in this call to action. So sincerely, Dr. Rutherford, this was amazing. It really was. And we would like to open it up to our Slido to questions. I will pass it over to Dr. Khan at this time, who, Dr. Khan, if you don't mind just listing the questions. And if you do have any other questions, that you could also share them in the chat area.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rutherford, for your thought-provoking analysis of digital technologies that we encounter every day and may not even know it. There are several questions for you. I'll share some in the time that we have remaining. The first one is, I appreciate you discussing the accessibility to educators in using VR tools. How would you suggest approaching the introduction of sensitive topics through VR?
Great. I think that, so the first part is you always want to make sure that you have an inclusive classroom climate to begin with, and that you give warnings to students that you're going to be looking at some of this information and letting them know it may be difficult to view this, but this is why I'm sharing this. This is the learning objective that you hope to be able to address and what you hope for them to get out of that experience. With my teacher candidates, we played a video game about the food crisis in Darfur. And in the video game, you were in the role of someone trying to get water, and the students would play it, and then they would get shot. And I would warn them, and I would ask them, we'd have a conversation, we'd debrief, how did that make you feel? It's really important to do the prep work to create an inclusive and welcoming and supportive classroom environment. Let them know ahead of time what the learning objective is, and then have a good debrief anytime you're watching any content, especially when it comes and it's so immersive that you can really feel that. So I think it's important to really lay out a good plan of how you're going to utilize that and be very clear and pragmatic about how the learning objective will be addressed and what you want students to get out of that.
Thank you, Dr. Rutherford. The next question. Dr. Carrie Wu discussed how white educators empathize with white students and not racialized students. What do we need in addition to empathy to support DEI?
I think empathy is such an important and powerful tool. I think it's really important for allies to do the work, to really understand what the experiences of your students are like, and especially your students of color. And you may think you know what their lives are like, but to really understand that and to get to know your students and to understand that. I think empathy is such an important tool, because once you truly have authentic empathy, you can be better prepared to craft your learning experience to support your students and make sure that you are avoiding replicating any historical trauma or biases or prejudice as well. And you can say that VR and AR can help you walk in the shoes of a specific individual, but it's always important to remember, you get to take the headset off. I don't get to take my skin off. So it's really important you can empathize and understand that, but it's really in trying to get to know your students that you will understand that more. So I think that is really important. And I'm glad that student brought up the almost triggering nature of a really immersive experience that these technologies can do, to be cognizant of that.
The next question is the use of blockchain for credentials also including micro-credentialing, or is it mainly for larger milestones such as course results, graduations, etc.?
No, I saw an example, and it was a high school teacher that created a blockchain of his class, and he included all the class resources and all the student artifacts. So not just that they had an individual student portfolio, but the students then, as a part of that blockchain, because it had a link to all of those resources. So it isn't just for large institutions, anyone can create a blockchain. And I think that was a great example of how an individual teacher did. Again, he had to, because most of these blockchains are powered by specific cryptocurrencies. So he had to spend some money, and I think he said it cost him about $75 to create that blockchain and an NFT that went along with it. But it was a great experience. So you can use it for micro-credentials, you can use it for digital portfolios, you can use it for any learning experience. And like I said, I could create a blockchain about this session and all the participants within it. So it doesn't have to be just for an institutional use. And I would encourage the student that asked that question to consider creating their own blockchain just to experience it.
Thank you, Dr. Rutherford, and that concludes our session with you today. We do have a number of other questions that were posed, and hopefully we can send those to you for your input if we do have time. And I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ewert to conclude.
Just as a final finale, we do want to thank you very much for both our attendees for being here today. We encourage you to engage in the call to action. And to Dr. Rutherford, thank you for enlightening us in so many different capacities when it comes to regarding ourselves as future ready educators. So amazing job. We wish everybody a wonderful evening. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.